Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Alexandra Greenberg, and this is Insight into Wellness. Today, we are speaking our truth, talking about the importance of using our voice to share our truths from our home life to our community and on stages. And my guest today is Tricia Brouk. She is an international award-winning director. She works in theater, film, and television. In addition to her work in the entertainment industry, she applies her expertise to the art of public speaking. She produced TEDxLincolnSquare and Speakers Who Dare in New York City. She choreographed Black Box on ABC and The Affair on Showtime, Rescue Me on Fox, and John Turturro's Romance and Cigarettes, where she was awarded a Golden Thumb Award from Roger Ebert. And the series she directed, Sublets, won Best Comedy at the Vancouver Web-Festival. She curates and hosts the Speaker Salon in New York City and The Big Talk, an award-winning podcast on iTunes and YouTube. She was recently awarded Top Director of 2019 by the International Association of Top Professionals in her documentary, Right Livelihood, A Journey to Hear about the Buddhist Chaplain at Rikers Island, which won Best Documentary Short at the Olympus Film Festival. And you're gorgeous. I love your shirt. An inside look at bullying and mental health won an award of merit at the Awareness Festival. So I'm going to go ahead and say, you know, a little bit something about speaking your truth. Thank you so much for joining me, Tricia.
Thank you so much for having me today, Alexandra. And I want to just highlight your voice is so amazing. I could just let it wash over me for the rest of the day.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, I've been practicing my whole life for this moment right now.
It's paid off. It's like velvet.
Oh, thank you. Well, I truly, truly am happy to have you here today. And I always like to start off the podcast just simply knowing a little bit about you and always knowing about where your healing started to root. Did it root as a child? Were you running around speaking your truth and yelling your name out loud, or did it come to you later in life?
This is such a great question. I was not conscious of any sort of truth as a child. And I refer to myself as what David Nagel calls being unconsciously competent. I was a hardworking dancer. I understood discipline. I understood commitment. I understood showing up on time, all the things that dancers need to be and do in order to have success. That was my truth. And I had no idea that I was unconsciously living it. I moved to New York City, pursued a career in dance, was living my truth without knowing how to express my truth. So as a dancer on stage, doing what I needed to do to perform in order to serve my audiences, again, not knowing that was living my truth, not knowing that was a truth at all. That being able to show up for audiences and entertain them and move them and use art and dance as a form of healing, unconscious completely. It wasn't until I began working with speakers, and that is only 3 years ago. I was working in film, television, and theater for 3 decades in New York City, still in New York, still doing my thing. And speakers started reaching out to me to work with me as a director. When I realized the importance and the power of speaking one's truth from a stage and one's personal truth from a stage, not someone else's choreography, not someone else's script, but your script, it was a complete awakening. It was a complete removal of being unconsciously competent and stepping into being a limitless creator, and then really knowing the power of sharing one's truth and how I could support others in doing that.
You know, you just peeled back a layer for me just right now by saying that. We have a similar history. I grew up a dancer as well, sharing my truth with my body. And, you know, I never really saw it as that. Or, yeah, mind blown right now. Okay, here we go. We got another 28 minutes of this. You know, something. So I met you through one of your, I was blinking. Please remind me.
Tova?
No, well, through Tova, but through your online
Me?
academy. Thank you. Yes, I met you. Blanking. I met you through your academy, and really was just so attracted to how you were able to pull the truth out of everyone, myself included. And I think speaking our truth right now is so important. And as white passing women here in this time right now, speaking our truth or not speaking sometimes means everything right now. What does sharing your truth look like in this moment, 2020, right now?
I think sharing your truth starts with credibility, vulnerability, and relatability. And it also means being willing to be judged. It means being willing to be criticized. I share that when in my truth, when Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor's news broke of their deaths, of their murders, my truth was calling my community together and having a big talk roundtable about race. So I brought in LaRon Barton, Antoine Ramon, two Black men, Andrew Sotomayor, Puerto Rican man, Tamika Felder, Gisela Adisa, two Black women, Nydia Hahn and Ming Shelby, two Asian women. And I said, would you come and have a conversation with me about race? That was my desire to speak the truth and to open up a dialogue about what needed to be talked about in that moment. And it was my job to speak the truth by listening. So it was a really important moment of my truth needs to model that we have to listen right now. And I want to open up a dialogue so that we can teach other people how to speak their truth, how to be heard, how to create a dialogue in a safe space. And that was a very important moment of, how do I speak my truth? Well, I need to bring together a community of diverse human beings so that I can listen to their truth, if that makes sense.
Oh, completely. Completely. That is one of the biggest lessons that I'm learning right now, is to not speak, but listen. And in listening, learn my truth, relearn my truth.
That's so well said, Alexandra. Relearn. We have to stay curious.
Mm-hmm.
We have to constantly evolve and stay curious and be in action at all times when it comes to truth.
That action piece, that is everything. There is no more sitting on the sidelines watching life go by. It's over, done, in the past. And then, comes in, how do we heal? How do we continue to heal? And then how do we continue to speak our truth in this new time, or in this time?
Something else that was really important to me, you refer to me as a woman who passes as white,
Mm-hmm.
right? I never thought about that before. I have certainly been conscious of privilege and also being conscious of being a woman. I also live in New York City, where I'm not put up against too many barriers, right? It's very open here. I work for myself. And after the conversation with my colleagues, the Big Talk Roundtable, a conscious conversation about race, within 2 or 3 days, George Floyd was murdered.
Oh my.
And I had just had this conversation, and then that happened. And so I decided I need to write a book. So within that period of time, I wrote chapter 1 to my book, which is coming out in December, The Influential Voice, which is about systemic racism, the impeachment hearing, and the pandemic. Because speaking my truth about illuminating what's going on in the world and how it is our responsibility to speak with dignity, no matter what side you are on, was that moment of, I cannot not speak my truth. It is that urgent. And so I wrote the first chapter of my book, submitted it to a publisher, and within a few days had a book deal because I chose to risk being criticized, being given bad feedback, all of those things. So I share with your audience that speaking your truth is not always easy. It comes with some fear. And with that, you must align yourself with the power of speaking your truth. It's really important spending time on podcasts like this, where you're being given permission to speak your truth and you're being shown how to speak your truth, which is also very important. I think we're going to get to that.
Mm-hmm.
That as a white woman, speaking my truth means being in action. It means listening, and it means illuminating the powerful stories of others in an inclusive way.
And you did talk about where you touched on possibly being wrong, not saying the right thing. Let's kind of dive into the framework or the foundation of how do you start to speak your truth? How do you imagine what it could be like if you're not there, if you're someone who hasn't been able to, hasn't had the opportunity? Let's dive into that.
Thank you. One of the first things that I invite you to really consider when you are thinking about speaking your truth, sharing your story, which could be a story born from trauma, shame, all of the things that human beings go through. Make certain that you have worked through this emotionally. When you're sharing your truth, it's coming from a place of vulnerability, and vulnerability is okay, but an open wound is not. Super important that you understand you've worked through this process, that you're on the other side of it. And I share a story specifically with you about Sarah Montana, TEDxLincolnSquare speaker. She applied to speak at my event. And in her written application, she talked about forgiveness. She wanted to share the idea about forgiveness and why it's important. And with her application, along came the personal story, her sharing her truth, which was her mother and brother were murdered on Christmas Eve. And I kept reading and I thought, how am I ever going to put this woman on my stage? I'm going to feel bad. She's going to feel bad. The audience is going to feel bad. How are we going to be able to hear her? And I gave myself the challenge. Ask her to submit a video. I challenged myself. How's this possible? And she, to this day, submitted one of the most powerful video submissions I've ever seen, because she was healed from this truth. She shared the story in a way that was meant to give the audience an opportunity to heal. So it was truly a gift of her truth. And with that, she definitely, this is the framework I used with my speakers, and you've gone through this process with me, Alexandra. You have to use context. First, be healed. And then second, move into context and ask yourself these three questions. Always ask yourself these three questions. Why is this idea important? Why is it important to me? And why is it important to the world? When you're deciding to share your truth, it needs to be from a place of absolute service. If you're sharing it just so that you'll feel better, you're not sharing it for the right reasons. You want to share it in order to serve others. You want to share it in order to change or even save someone else's life. So with Sarah, why was this idea important? Because forgiveness is always good. We all know it's going to make us feel better. We're going to have a better life. But no one tells you how to forgive. Why is this idea important to Sarah? Because she's gone through the process and she wants to share the steps of how to forgive. And why is this idea important to the world? Because no one tells us how to forgive. So if we can learn how to do it and put it into practice, think about how much better the world would be for us and for our communities if we all knew how to forgive.
Yeah. And when we start to talk about sharing our truth, if we can break it down to what is it like to share your truth with your friend, with your family, and I know there's a lot of listeners, many people out in the world, of course, wearing different hats and sharing, maybe curtailing or withholding truths from specific people at specific times. What happens when someone is speaking different truths to different people, more on the community and friendship level? Do you think we need to be sharing one truth to everyone all the time, or do you think that it's okay if we hold back at certain times? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that when you are in complete and total alignment and in integrity with yourself, you will only share one truth.
And I agree with you 100%. 100, 110.
And when you are out of alignment and out of integrity with yourself, you might be sharing more than one truth. And that could potentially create resentment of self, resentment of others. And when you're trying to speak the truth and you're confusing the issue, you are getting in the way of having a streamlined, dialed in way of being in the world. So I really encourage you to get in integrity with yourself, get in alignment with yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to have the same opinion as your friends or your family. It simply means that you are in integrity and you will speak your truth and you will lovingly accept them not accepting you if that's what they choose to do.
Mm-hmm. I work this into my own life as much as possible. I really do. I try to speak the same truth all the time, and I ask my clients to do this as well. And it's so interesting that I will speak to people and we'll talk about speaking the truth. You're talking and maybe you didn't say what you wanted to say, and I always say it's never too late to go back and say it again the way that you really wanted to.
Do-overs are
Do-overs.
so important. I have a do-over in my community. I have a do-over in my marriage. I have a do-over with my family and friends. We are human beings and we might be activated by something and we haven't given ourselves enough time to just pause, breathe before we speak. So give yourself a do-over, get back into alignment, get back into integrity, and say that I've been out of alignment, I've been out of integrity. I would love to be able to have a do-over with you so I can say what I actually mean so that you can hear it in a way that I mean for you to hear it.
Yeah. How do you get people to speak louder, not just in tone and level, but to share more of their own self? How do you pull that out of people?
That's a very good question. And it is certainly some magic that happens in real time. It really comes from a place of creating a safe space. Being in the studio, in the rehearsal space with actors means from day one, they need to walk into the studio and feel completely safe. And that starts with something as simple as the chairs and the table being set up, water for them, the temperature of the room being comfortable, a stage manager who they know they can ask questions. That first second they walk into the space, me greeting them immediately and calling them by name and hugging them. Social distance.
I know. I was like, oh, the hug. Where did it go?
It means really from the second they walk into the space, they feel taken care of, because when they drop into a scene, in order for me to get what I need from them, which is truth, authenticity, absolute realness in the moment, they have to feel safe. They have to feel like they can fail 100% and I'm going to lift them back up. I'm not going to laugh at them. I'm going to say, that was a great choice. Let's choose something else next time. And it's the same thing I do with speakers. I create a safe environment so that they feel like they can speak their truth. They can share a personal story. They can talk about what's important so that we can get, and this is me pulling it out of them, get to that beautiful idea that they didn't know existed, but was wrapped in the package of their personal experience.
Mm. So relating that back to, you know, talking to your friends, talking to your community, it's really finding that safe space for that conversation to be held. And what does that look like? I'm just talking off the cuff, but maybe that means a therapist, having a third person in the room, or maybe that means creating a space outside of your home to have a conversation, or finding that really safe space. So important.
And I love that you're talking about boundaries and what those boundaries need to look like. When you are going to have a conversation with a close friend or a colleague that you are slightly concerned may go a direction you're uncomfortable with, absolutely set up boundaries and ask specifically for what you're looking for in this conversation. Hey, I would love to have a conversation with you about something that's really important to me. I would love to know that we can create a safe space together and that there will not be any judgment or criticism. And that if at any point in the conversation you are uncomfortable, that you just raise your hand so that I know.
Mm.
Give those boundaries, give those guidelines so that that openness stays there and no one's getting activated, no one's getting triggered, and there's not there's no reaction, right? There's a response. You're getting a response, the person's raising their hand, but they're not reacting to you. So I think that's also super important when you're creating that space, is that you understand the difference between reaction and response.
Mm-hmm. What are the side effects of not using our voices, of not speaking our truth?
Oh my goodness.
It's a
They
big
are
one.
monumental. And I share a story with you, Alexandra. 2 years ago, I was coming back from seeing Michelle Obama speak at the Barclays Center. I zipped out before everyone was released, 15,000 people in that place, and I got on the subway, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. And I'm on the subway, and there's three young white boys, couple seats down for me. There's a lot of people on the train. It was very safe. And we were coming from Brooklyn going into Manhattan, and they were talking extremely loudly about two girls they went to school with in a very, very derogatory way, in a very violent way. And I look around and I'm thinking, okay, I'm safe and I'm not going to cause a scene. However, I need to speak my truth right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yes,
walked
yes.
over to those young men and I said, excuse me, this is incredibly inappropriate. You are speaking violence against the girls you're talking about. You're speaking violence against me, and you're speaking violence against every single woman on this train. I would like you to stop right now. And they gave me a little bit of mouthing off back and forth. And I sat back down and they quieted.
Mm.
And what I noticed was there were four of them, I believe. Three of them were doing all of the talking and one of them wasn't. So by speaking my truth and sharing and speaking up and having a voice in that moment, it is my hope that the one boy who wasn't speaking next time will say, this isn't okay, guys. I know you're my friends, but this isn't okay.
Mm.
That's the kind of ripple effect that can happen when you do speak and share your truth. Had I kept quiet, those four young men might never have stopped doing that. And I don't know what they're doing right now, but they might have not even considered that that way of communicating is violent.
Mm-hmm.
And by speaking my truth, I'm hoping that at least one of them can understand that the power of your words needs to be acknowledged at all time.
If we are not acknowledging, if we're not speaking what our truth is, just so everyone knows, it doesn't just disappear. It gets lodged into the body. It gets moved into our muscles and our tissues. And if we're looking at it in an Ayurvedic sense, it starts to disrupt the tissues. It starts to cause dis-ease. We hear, heartache or, if we're really starting to feel into the body, if we're not speaking our truth, it's lodging itself, it's finding a space to sit until we do. So important.
Yes.
I want to kind of wrap up our conversation. You've been elevating and sharing your stage, as you talked about, in a massive way with people of color and our community. For white passing people, for white people in general, maybe not for white passing, but for white people in general, finding it a challenge about where to start speaking our truths and community, creating community and conversation with people of color. What advice do you have?
I really think it starts with listening, as we shared at the top of the call. And then it moves into asking the question, how can I be part of the solution? And it also means being in action. And that does not mean posting one Black Lives Matter graphic on Instagram. It means being in constant action. It means always having the conversation. It means being willing to make a mistake. It means being willing to say, I need a do-over.
Mm-hmm.
Could you teach me more? How can I understand more? How can I be part of the solution? And it means being conscious of being inclusive. It means being conscious of going to events that are diverse, of hosting events that are diverse. If you are someone who speaks your truth and desires to have equality of humanity, that means you need to be practicing that. If you are someone who is an entrepreneur and you have a community of people who all look like you and have the same belief systems as you, you are not practicing inclusion and diversity. It's really, really important that you are in action and that you are showing up every single day the way you are speaking your truth. So I would say it's important to be part of the conversation and to start having conversations with your friends of color. They want to tell you how you can show up for them, but they're not going to tell you unless you have the conversation and you start asking. Also, it is not their responsibility to teach you about race in this country. So it's your responsibility to do the educating yourself and then be in conversation.
I love that. That is the key. We educate. We will educate ourselves, and then you are in the conversation, um, not just taking from the conversation, but giving to the conversation. That is
Absolutely.
everything. Do you have anything else you'd like to let our listeners know before we wrap up?
I've loved having this conversation with you, and I reiterate what Alexandra said about not speaking your truth, being stuck in your body. And when you free that truth and you trust that the right person is going to hear it, you have changed and even saved someone's life.
Thank you so much again for, excuse me, taking the time for having this really deep conversation. If you would like to get in touch with Tricia and listen to anything that we've talked about, it will be in the show notes. Please reach out with any questions that you may have. Thank you so much for listening. Again, my name is Alexandra Greenberg, and this is Insight into Wellness. Talk to you next time.